So I will be going over in the next 15 minutes, because I have this down pretty much as far as timing goes, the presentation we're doing at our community sessions, because I know how challenging it is for people to attend the sessions, but I would like every person in the school district to have the information that they need in order to make a decision on November 8th. And I think this particular presentation really helps to give people the foundational knowledge that will be important to them as they move forward in their decision making. So here we go. We know that the board took action on August 22nd to ensure that there would be a referendum question on the November 8th ballot. You will see it when you are voting, when you flip your ballot over. The ballot's on the back side, or the question is on the back side of the ballot. We start every presentation, and I really do mean every presentation, with our mission and our values. Why we exist as an institution, and what we as a community value, and how that institution carries its mission forward. So you can see here we have an excerpt from our mission statement that was developed in 1989 and is just as relevant then as it is today. And then also our 5 values. And we already spoke tonight about the calendar and the amount of community input that is a part of creating the calendar every year. And I want to be able to remind people that our values were a part of a community input creation process also. There were well over 100 people who spent 3 days in the RCI cafeteria talking about what was important to them as a community member within the Oregon School District. And the values that drive our decisions on a day in, day out basis are depicted in that graphic. What we really know as we're thinking about our students and their growth as learners in all aspects of who they are as people, that the most important thing in helping them become, as you can see here, helping them acquire the skills, knowledge, attitudes to achieve their individual potential, the most important thing in that is the teacher in the classroom. But I want to make sure that it's understood that when I say teacher in the classroom, I'm talking about all of the adults that positively impact our students, from the time they get on the bus in the morning to the time they get to their classroom, to all the different classes they're able to take, to the lunch that they're served, to the visit they have to the office to drop something off or pick something up. It's all of those people who are positively impacting our kids every single day and have the greatest impact on their success. So I want to give you a little bit of background information on why we are where we are at today. Well, as I stated previously, we have a long and very proud tradition of working with our community to plan forward for the future of our students. And you'll see that later tonight when our amazing principals get up and start to speak to you about the goals for each of their schools related to Portrait of a Graduate. That's another example of how our community has worked together to plan for the future of our children. But as a community, we are faced with 2 significant challenges. And the first has already been referred to a couple of different times tonight, and that is the lack of state funding. And the second is really how that lack of state funding and the competitive marketplace interferes with our ability to retain and attract amazing educators. So the graphic that really tells this story, and a lot of people are surprised by this when they see it, is that in 2002, we were ranked number 11th nationally as far as spending per pupil, state aid spending per pupil. By 2020, we were 25th in the nation. We went from 11% above the national average in spending to 6% below. And what's really remarkable about this is that it's the largest drop in national ranking of any state in this time period. And that does not even include the 21-22 and 22-23 school years that have had 0% increases in state funding, despite the fact that we're in a considerably inflationary time. So how does that play out for us in our budget? And we're at a very high level here, and we understand that, but it's important for people to know the chunks, the big chunks of our budget. Well, of our operating budget, 90% of that is determined by the state, and that's about $55 million that's determined by the state. The other 10% we really don't have control over either, but the state has control over that 90%. Of our entire operating budget, 80% of it is spent on staffing and benefits. And that makes sense because I just finished talking about the fact that it's our people that make the difference. So that's where the funding should go, to the amazing people who do the work on behalf of our students and families. And then there's, of course, a 0% increase in state funding per student, and that has had a big impact on us. So here's another illustration of how that goes, and it's related to actually something that one of the speakers spoke to us about, and that is how the percent in state funding does slightly trail, that's the orange line, the line of CPI, which is the blue line. But boy, when it really takes a hit, as you can see from the graph, is 21-22. That's when the percentage change in funding from the state goes to a 0, and you see the blue line representing inflation going significantly higher than it has been in the past. This leaves us with a very major financial gap. For the 21-22 school year, the difference between the orange line and the blue line is $2.9 million. For 22-23, and that's the reason for the dotted lines, it could be anywhere from 3.6 to 4.8, depending on where inflation ends or winds up at the end of this year. So what impact does that have on our students and on our teachers? Because for our students, it's about keeping those amazing teachers in the classroom or in the lunchroom or in the office or on the bus on the way to school, keeping all of those people with them. We have been for a very long time a destination district, and what I mean by that is when someone graduates from college and they're hoping to get an interview for their first job as a teacher, we're one of the districts that they hope they get hired at. And we love that, and that's great. It's also one of the places that people who are moving to the area, they look and they decide they want to be here. We also, despite the fact that we've had 2 years of 0 increases to base pay, 2 years in a row, we still have a very high staff retention rate, and we want to keep that. We have to be able to offer compensation that keeps up with inflation and is competitive with our neighbors. And if you look at the chart on the bottom, you can see that despite the fact that there has been CPI of 1.23 and 4.7 for the last 2 years, the increase in base pay for our staff, and that's every position, has been $0. So if we go back over the course of the last 2 years, what we wish we had been in the financial, we had the financial ability to do for our staff in order to keep them here is to pay, to have a 5.93% increase. But instead, it's been 0. And we don't know what 23-24 will be like because we don't know what the financial picture will be like. So what is really the bottom line in this particular situation? If we want to continue offering the highest quality education and services to our students, and we know how important that is, we're not talking about adding all kinds of fancy things. We're talking about keeping the amazing quality of education and services that we currently have. If we want that, and I believe we all do, then we have to keep the amazing, excellent educators we currently have and attract new ones when the time comes. And it is happening in an increasingly competitive market. And I'll give you an example. This is really the first year where we've had a significant number of people to whom we have offered jobs turn us down because they are earning more in other neighboring districts. That has not been a problem before, and it is becoming a problem now. We're feeling the impact already. And as was stated previously this evening too, there are fewer people going into the profession. And why? I have no idea, because I still believe it's the best one in the world. But there are fewer people who are entering the profession. Consequently, there will be districts competing for the same people. And we want to be able to offer competitive salaries to keep our great people here We don't want anybody to have to make the hard decision to go elsewhere when they really want to be here too. So what solutions do we have? Well, we have continually reviewed our budget, analyzed our spending. One of the big pieces that came from that, of course, was the change in health insurance that allowed us to lock in some lower costs and lock in some rates. And that was a very hard decision. People didn't want to change health insurance while we were in a pandemic. But it was the fiscally responsible decision to make because it allowed us to save, I had to review the numbers with Andy, but it allowed us to save $600,000 over a few years. And that's really a lot of money when we're talking about a budget that's currently in deficit. We also used our one-time ESSER funds, or federal funds that were supposed to be for COVID-related expenses. We used them for COVID-related expenses and to support our students with short-term mental health and academic support positions. And we also did some work to restructure debt. And all of that led to a decrease in the impact of any potential referendum by $2 million. Now, I just want to talk just briefly about one-time funds because they're in the paper a lot, and we're very grateful for them. So on August 30th, right before school started, Governor Evers announced an allocation of one-time federal funds. And as I said, this is great, and we are grateful. And for us, it was $350,000 in total. However, we already had a budgetary deficit of $650,000 because prices have gone up and funding hasn't. Consequently, we had to use this one-time fund to decrease the deficit in our budget so that it came down to a $300,000 deficit as opposed to $650,000. But that's a one-year solution. We'd still be facing a financial cliff of that $650,000 next year. In addition to that, there's also a dollar amount allocated specifically for mental health support. We're grateful for that too, but once again, it's one-time funding. We can't pay long-term bills with one-time funding. And all of it together is less than 1% of our annual salary and benefits budget. So what are other districts doing? Because I'm sure that's on people's minds as they're listening to this. Well, they're using the one-time funds for operations, similar to what we just had to do. They're reducing services and staff, and of course that leads to an increase in class sizes, something that we're all hoping to avoid through a different way to look at funding. They're receiving funds from last year's referendum in April. Several of them went then, and several are going this November. As a matter of fact, 8 out of 16 in Dane County are going, and you see all of the districts on the screen as far as the ones who are going for an operational referendum on the November 8th ballot. In the state, there's 40 different school districts going for an operating referenda, and that is important to note because this is not an Oregon problem. This is not a Dane County problem. This is a state of Wisconsin problem. However, we are talking about it tonight within the context of what we can do within the Oregon School District. So this summer, we met with, we held several open houses, some engagement sessions to really invite people in and understand what's important to them. Here's the challenge we're facing, and then we asked them what's important to you. And we provided some of these things that we consider to be priorities and then asked them, how do you feel about this? And it was wonderful to be able to talk to people because while everyone may have some varying opinions on one point or another, there was a lot we agreed upon. Like the importance to continue to attract and retain the best educators, to keep good and sensible class sizes, to continue to provide the important mental health services, to make sure that our staff salaries are competitive with neighboring school districts so we aren't putting our great people in the position of having to decide if they stay or if they go. And addressing the operational budget needs that we have right now. As I've mentioned several times, we have a deficit in our operating budget. So The board took action on August 22nd to put this question, or the question that we'll show in a moment, on the November 8th referendum, or on the ballot as a referendum. And the question will be about exceeding the revenue limit by 11.4 million over 3 years. And I'm going to show this to you in a chart on the next one to give you a better idea. So please note the statement that's on the bottom. This chart shows an additional increase each year over 3 years. We are taking 3 years to build up to the $11.4 million ability to tax up to $11.4 million. We're taking 3 years to build up to it because we thought that was much better for the taxpayer than just starting out of the gate by asking for 11.4. So first you have the $98 on $100,000 of assessed property in the first year. The second year it's the 98 plus the 95, and the third year it's the 95 plus the 66, and then it stays. You can see on the bottom, it's a recurring referendum. The amount stays at 11.4 million each year thereafter. All of this information is on our website. I really encourage people to take a look. It's very important that you spend some time there because there are a lot of really great FAQs that can help you understand if you don't understand any of this. And it gives you information on how to contact one of us so that we can help you gain a better understanding. Here's the actual question. As I mentioned previously, it's on the back of the ballot, and you can see from the wording that it builds. It builds over 3 years to the ability to levy up to $11.4 million of additional funding. And I think it's important to note that if the state does come through and gives more money to schools, the board also can make the decision to not levy up to $11.4 million because the state has filled some of those budgetary holes. So of course, how you can learn more, there's a QR code on the screen. It takes you to the web page I spoke about, and then we have another community house open house on Saturday, 9:30 a.m. at Rome Corners Intermediate School. I hope we can see some people there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bergstrom, for that thorough presentation that you, and again, it's a mirror of the presentation that you've been giving at all the community houses that have happened recently. So I'm gonna now open the floor to the board. If there's any board members that would like to make a few statements. Heather, we can start with you if you'd like.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom, for that presentation. I have 4 things I want to say tonight. I'll be brief. One, seems like there's some school finance confusion in the community, and I totally get that because school finance is confusing. I think we're very fortunate to have Andy Weiland's expertise, and I'm grateful for all the work that he's done. Just like Dr. Bergstrom, he has been at these sessions and continues to answer questions and provide information to people who have questions. I just want to make one point on that the school district is not like a regular business. We don't have the opportunity to increase revenues on our own accord. And so when we're talking about increasing teacher, staff, I like how you say positive impactors, and their salary, this is coming from, their cost of living raise is based on the state providing increase and a per pupil cost. So our hands are tied because this time around it's 0. That's why we're going to referendum, just as 8 of the 16 school districts that Dr. Bergstrom shared in Dane County are doing. The second point I want to say is we are in a tough spot. Repeat, we are in a tough spot. Now I'm going to add on to it. We are in a tough spot because of the legislative increase of $0. One-time funding, Dr. Bergstrom, you took a lot of the things I was going to say here, but one-time funding doesn't cut it. One-time funding from the Fed, one-time funding from the state is not ongoing. It doesn't work to increase the salaries for teachers, bus drivers, paras, custodians, librarians, any of that. The third point I want to share is while being able to provide raises for all of the people that we've been mentioning is my preference, this referendum would not be my preference unless it's necessary. I am in support of it because it's necessary. So I think, if the state of Wisconsin budget surplus supported education, we would not be here. That did not happen. The alternative to this referendum is losing teachers. And even though we do have an incredible culture, I hear all the time that it is not just about the money. I fear that the gap between the districts that pass these referendums and those that don't will be too big. And the fourth thing is I look forward and hope that we do come to a point where the state steps forward with money and we don't have to levy the $11.4 million. But without any knowledge of that happening, we are in this position because of the state legislature. Thank you.
All right, Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. So in early August, the administrative team brought to the board several referendum options. One of them would have allowed us to offer salaries that would be comparable to our best funded competitors. As Mr. King mentioned earlier, I too have significant concerns with people who live on a fixed income and may struggle to meet any increased tax burden. And so it was for this reason that I very much appreciated the recommendation of the administrative team at the August 22nd board meeting that was aimed at keeping the referendum costs as low as possible, and while staying moderately competitive, right in that middle zone, and working to keep a mill rate that didn't go up, that didn't skyrocket. Further after that, in September, we as a board had to approve a deficit budget because there simply aren't enough dollars to fund the operations. And that doesn't even allow for any pay increase for our educators. So, I mean, a significant part of this is inflation has challenged the budget. And without a referendum, we need to make cuts. And we need to make cuts that no one wants to be cut. Unfortunately, those cuts would mean that the kids would be the ones to pay the price. While Wisconsin is hit especially hard because of the legislature and the failure to provide appropriate funding, it's become increasingly difficult to recruit and retain educators as well because of a nationwide teacher shortage that has been building for years. But without the ability to offer competitive salaries and bonuses, we would have to be looking at cutting course offerings, co-curricular activities. We would have to look at increasing class sizes, potentially having virtual teachers in the classrooms. Other districts have considered decreasing educational requirements for teachers, as well as several districts in Texas are actually shifting to a 4-day school week so that they can increase the appeal to the teachers so that they can compete nationwide for educators. Each and every one of these options negatively impacts our students. In addition to hurting our students, it negatively impacts the future of our community. From looking at the numbers over the past few years, we know that we are already seeing increased educator turnover. And again, this does not benefit our students. The current state legislator has continued to collect taxpayer money, and that taxpayer money should have been earmarked for public schools. Ms. Inman mentioned that the rainy day fund has an excess of, or has a dollar amount of $1.73 billion. But they have additional excess unencumbered funds and currently have an excess of $8 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andy.
I think that includes the rainy day fund.
Including the rainy day fund. And the legislature is simply refusing to give this money to our schools, to our kids, even though they have a responsibility for funding our public schools. So the ideal situation would be for the state to do what they're supposed to do, and this referendum would be unnecessary. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, and so this is the option that provides a solid educational foundation for our learners and to support their ultimate career goals. And I, for one, I don't want my student or any of the students in the entire district to be taught in suboptimal conditions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mary. Who would like to go next? We can go to this side of the room. Tim, you want to go? Okay.
For fear of repeating what everybody else has, I'll try to be brief. This referendum is about keeping up, unfortunately. It isn't about dreaming about, the next vision of what a school looks like or the next vision of what a teacher looks like. It is simply about keeping up, which is hard for me to swallow sometimes. I don't like to just keep up, but that's what this referendum is about. It's not about getting ahead. It's about maintaining our leadership position, not extending our leadership position. It's about recruiting, and equally as important, holding on to the best teachers in our market. And without it, we won't. I want to highlight two things from my personal perspective. First of all, this referendum is about stepping in locally until the state returns to their habit, I hate to say it that way, and frankly, their requirement to fund public education in Wisconsin. Secondly, when the state steps back to the table and either retroactively recognizes what we are subsidizing locally or picks up from where we are at that point, we won't need to sustain this recurring element. But until then, it's recurring. We have to do it. It's an important element of keeping the culture we have in place today. In other words, we can make the adjustment to the levy when they return to the table. However, for lack of one of those options, of course, it needs to remain permanent. Bottom line, I support the referendum, and I remain optimistic. I do share optimism with Ms. Pollock and with the Kings. We are optimists in the true spirit of optimism. I do believe this is going to be rectified. It's important and incumbent on all of us to vote when it comes time to vote. Because I know we blame it on the legislature, and they do deserve the blame, but we vote in the legislature. And so we have to vote. With that optimistic spirit, I looked at what the referendum is. There were 5 bullet points that Dr. Bergstrom brought up, and I look at the optimistic side of each of those 5 bullet points because the other side kills me. The pessimistic side of those 5 bullet points are hard for me to read, and we can't afford to do it. So I do not like spending money. I told you that last time, and I'll say it again. I look forward to the state stepping back to the table because the people who are voting those legislatures in, and they will do the right thing. And this will be a painful memory in the not too distant future. So I support the referendum wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Tim. Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, I'd like to follow Tim up because I have similar comments, and I as well will try not to repeat. But our community residents get the chance to decide what they want for our children in this community. That's what this referendum is all about. Our state law sets our limits on the amount that our school districts can levy, and this referendum is a question to the voters that want to decide if we want to allow the district to override that limit. On the vein of keeping up, I mean, Tim, like you, I want the Oregon School District to be competitive with our neighboring districts. Our Oregon kids deserve the very best, and as has been said before, compensation and benefits are really just one of the reasons why our staff stay with us. But I believe that gap is continuing to widen, and we really need to take action to minimize that gap. And as we look around, 8 of 16 Dane County school districts are asking for more funding. And as our neighboring districts are increasing their tax levies, we really need to consider that as well. One of the things I've been looking at over the past few weeks, and this is just one measure of comparison, but the mill rates of our neighboring districts, of our competitors. Looking back at the 2021 mill rates, which is the latest values that are on record. We're in about the bottom half of the Dane County school districts. And that's before our mill rate has been reduced through our latest budget proposal for the current school year. That being said, many of those Dane County school districts who already have higher mill rates than us are also going to a referendum this November. So that gap has the potential to widen even further. And then lastly, this really demands a lot of emphasis. But if the state does increase funding for education, we have the ability to reduce the levy. And for me as a board member, I would support decreasing our levy by and offsetting that tax levy by the amount that would come through in state funding. What we're asking for is that $11.4 million over the next 3 years. And I feel that would be the value that's the value that we have determined we need, and it would be my position to decrease the levy by any additional state funding that we would receive. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Anna?
So many incredible comments from my fellow board members. Thank you all for your leadership tonight. I have a couple of things to add, and some of those are in the vein of the keeping up comment. And one of the things I guess I just want to recognize is I was talking with some folks about the referendum, and they said, well, gosh, Anna, I thought our teachers were in the highest category for compensation. I thought we were in the top compared to our neighboring districts. And I said, well, that was the case back in 2016, right? When our community came out and showed our district and our teachers how much we value them by approving a referendum to exceed the revenue limit to pay our teachers more. But other districts have learned about that. They've caught up to us, and now we're starting to fall behind. And this is really an issue with some of our most veteran educators. We're talking some of the teachers who have been with us the longest, who know our community and our students and our families the best. And we need to keep those people in our district, right? We want to keep those veteran teachers. We're talking about the paraprofessionals and the special education paraprofessionals who are working in our classrooms to help manage all of the things that are happening in these classrooms, to give attention to all of the students who need that extra support. And so we are talking about a huge gap in those positions. We are talking about some of our principals, some of the people, some of the leaders in our schools that we are behind in what we are compensating. And that's where a part of this referendum is to look at how we can make some market rate adjustments to be in a better place within the Oregon School District to show all of our educators how much they are valued. Because when I look at the things that we as a community value, we value the high quality education that our kids are receiving. We value the diversity and variety of classes that are offered to our kids starting at those younger years and all the way up into those high school years. We value the attention and the connection that our amazing educators are giving our kids every single day. We value all of the support systems that our district hears about from our staff on all of the things that are happening to help students who need additional supports and challenge students who need additional challenges. So we're talking about just the whole child and the whole experience our kids have. If we as a community value that, we need to show our teachers that we value that. And unfortunately, we're in a position that is landing on us as a local community to bridge that gap. And like fellow board members have described, if we see additional funding coming our way, we're having a different conversation. And we're able to use those funds to fill those gaps and to make those differences. So I fully support this referendum, and that's really all I have to say tonight.
All right, thanks, Anna. Leslie, you're up if you'd like to say a few words.
Sure. In interest of people really being able to hear me and stuff, I'm going to make it short and sweet and just say I'm going to piggyback on everything my fellow board members have said, but especially that if the legislature does step up and start funding our schools like is their responsibility, I am all for us not taking that additional amount off our taxpayers. I don't feel like that's what we need to do. I think we need to be proactive in taking care of our teachers because they deserve this. They deserve this because they take care of our kids on a day in, day out basis, and they do a excellent job of taking care of them and helping them to rise to the next level. And I think that we have done that as a community, and I think we need to continue to do that to support them. So in that, I said I was going to make this short and sweet. I support this referendum. I think that we've made the right choice in the amount that we've needed to do, and I will be voting yes for this.
All right, thank you. I just have a couple of things. One of our primary jobs as school board members is the financial health of the Oregon School District. So we spent a ton of time talking with Andy and our administrators about what kind of financial position we were in. And so contrary to some comments this was the responsible thing to do. We cannot continue as a district with a deficit budget, and we've already made cuts. I think Dr. Bergstrom, you talked about that we made a difficult decision to change health insurance. Nobody around this table wanted to make that decision, but we saved $600,000. We restructured debt because of Andy's expertise. So we have already taken $2 million off this referendum bill, right? So it's our responsibility to look after the financial health. If you ask anyone around this table, did we want to vote to increase taxes of people in this community? The answer is no. We would never have wanted to do that, but we have no choice. And so one thing that I think is important that you've heard board members talk about tonight is a commitment that if the state comes back into the arena of funding public education, which is in the Wisconsin Constitution that they are supposed to do, that this board is committed to reconsidering and looking at lowering the tax levy away from our taxpayers so we don't have to go up to the $11.4 million referendum that we're asking for. You've heard board members talk about that. So that's kind of the head part and the tax part. Now I want to talk about our hearts. These are people that work in our district. They are teachers and social workers and school counselors and bus drivers and food service and substitute teachers and administrative professionals. These are people that are our neighbors, and they've been with our kids day in and day out. They deserve to know that this community cares about them like they've cared for our kids. That's what we're trying to do. As Tim said, we are not trying to make sure that they're the highest paid people in this county. We are trying to give them a sense of what they deserve, and they have not had a base wage increase for more than 2 years. So what I'm speaking to as somebody who's lived in this community for 25 years, who sat on this board for 7 years, I have a lot of faith in our community that they're going to come through. We're going to do this for our teachers.